Thanksgiving night. Thursday, November 28th, 2019, smelled like buttered rolls and hickory smoke in my small Plainfield kitchen. I am Frank, 66, a retired union electrician who left the trade early when my cardiologist told me my heart had started using up its margin for error. I keep the porch light warm, the coffee strong, and the peace hard-earned. My son Ethan, 36, talks like a seminar and walks like a deadline. He flips houses around Will County, chases quick turnarounds, and treats cash flow like a river he can pole vault over. He showed up late with that loose, cocky grin I used to mistake for charm, tossed his coat on my chair, and set a sleek Black Label bottle on my table like it was the answer to a question I had not asked. "Belated birthday, Dad," he said, tapping the brass-stamped seal. "Limited release. Only real players get these." He said it like I was lucky to have him. I had not had a drink in years. The first night I decided to stay sober, the house seemed larger, my bed quieter, my heartbeat more honest, and I promised myself I would keep it that way. So I told Ethan thank you, and felt that old friction between his appetite and my boundaries. As if on cue, he leaned back chair on two legs and muttered just loud enough to be heard. "You are too soft to finish anything." "You start, old man." He smiled while he said it like a joke between us, but it landed the way a nail lands when a hammer misses and bruises the wood. I did not rise to it. I have learned that I do not need to be a storm to change the weather in my own house. Robert came by for pie. He is 64, a contractor by trade, steady as the level in his pocket, and he is also Ethan's former father-in-law. That needs a line of clarity because people hear former and assume doors closed. In our family, the doors stayed half open. Ethan and Amanda Roberts' daughter fell apart a long season ago, but this is the Midwest. We share history handyman tools and the rare gift of a civil divorce that left two families still waving from their porches. Robert mentored me years back on a siding job after my first wife passed. We have broken bread every fall since. He lives in New Lenox, about 20 minutes south, and he wears a pacemaker that keeps time better than most men. He does not drink much, but he enjoys a measured pour with football on and grandbabies asleep, and he appreciates craftsmanship the way some men appreciate hymns. After dessert, while the house hummed with leftovers and football noise, I stepped onto the porch with him, the breath of November, like mint in the dark, and I put that bottle in his hands. I told him straight that my heart and I had an agreement, so I wanted him to have it. "For your shelf," I said, "or your slow Sundays." He smiled, surprised and a little proud, the kind of smile a good man gives when trusted. This matters. The bottle left my possession that very night. By Sunday, December 1st, I would say I had lost the bottle and something else too, an illusion I had carried too long. But you need to know it physically walked out with Robert on Thanksgiving. Leah texted our family thread a photo of the pie that made her famous at the hospital potluck. She is 32, my niece, my sister's girl, and an emergency room nurse at Silver Cross in New Lenox. Leah has the kind of eyes that stay calm when everyone else is sprinting toward panic. She helps at our table, teases Ethan like a cousin does, and reminds me to take my pills on time without sounding like a lecture. I'm telling you all this because the map matters. Plainfield for my porch. New Lenox for Robert, and Silver Cross Joliet, where Gary runs a veterinary lab, and Naperville for the boutique liquor store, where a limited bottle like that would brag about itself behind glass. If you have ever been blindsided by family greed, you know how hindsight paints roads between places you thought were just dots. After they left, I washed plates by hand the way I always do, because hot water and simple work quiets a house faster than any television. Out back, the motion light blinked twice and settled probably a raccoon tipping toward the compost bin. Inside, the bottle's empty space on my counter felt bigger than a piece of oak should. Ethan texted a thumbs up and a link to a video about turning under-market kitchens into profit. I could hear his voice in the captions. Other people call it cutting corners. He calls it optimizing. If you think I am judging him too harshly, I am not. I am telling you what the air felt like. A father knows when his son is selling him a future for a price that looks small at the start. Robert called to say thank you again once he got home. His voice had that Sunday game ease in it. He said he would save the bottle for a special night, maybe pour one finger and watch the bears try to make sense of themselves. We laughed. The porch creaked under me. The night was ordinary, almost perfect. While I locked the back door, I noticed the line of fishing rods I keep by the mudroom, and thought about tomorrow morning at the lake, how the quiet there belongs to whoever sets the hook first. I was grateful. That word is not a holiday decoration. It is muscle you choose to use. Here is me fixing the timeline you deserve to understand the gift arrived on Thanksgiving night. I passed it to Robert that same evening on my porch, and by Sunday, December 1st, I would say to myself that I had lost more than a bottle. But that is ahead of the story. For now, all you need to see is a peaceful house, a retired electrician measuring his breath against the hum of a furnace, a good man driving home with a gift he did not ask for, and a son who leaves a room feeling like he took something with him that did not belong to him. In the quiet just before sleep, my Ring doorbell chimed once and showed nothing but my own front steps. I let it go. I thought, as men my age often do, that ordinary is safe if you hold it close enough. I was wrong, but I will tell that part later. Just before midnight, on Thanksgiving, Thursday, November 28th, 2019, my phone lit the kitchen in a way the overhead never could. Leah's name filled the screen. She is my niece, 32, an emergency room nurse at Silver Cross Hospital in New Lenox, and she does not text during intake unless there is a reason. Robert had listed me as his emergency contact, which meant Leah could update me within policy. Uncle Frank Robert is here, she wrote. He is lightheaded, nausea rhythm is strange. I will call you in 5. I stood in the doorway between my warm kitchen and the cold back hall and felt the house tilt a degree. In the blue glow, I could see the black label's absence on the counter where it had sat for less than an hour. The gift had already left with him. You need the time for your own map? Leah's message hit at 11:58 at night. By 12:15 in the morning, my coat was on my keys in my palm, and the road between Plainfield and New Lenox stretched like a prayer with lines painted down the middle so a man would not drift. Silver Cross at night is its own country. Automatic doors breathe you in, and the heat vents smell like saline and lemon cleaner. Leah met me just inside, hair pulled back, badge swinging, eyes calm, in that way she learned from years of seeing people on their worst day and refusing to add her panic to their pile. He is stable, she said, her hand on my sleeve. The pacemaker is pacing, but his rhythm was irregular on arrival. We drew labs, the team is tracking his numbers, and the doctor wants to keep him for observation. She said it clearly so it could hold both of us up. When you love people, you begin to translate tone as quickly as words. She was telling me we were not at the cliff's edge, but the ground behind us had crumbled a little. I texted Robert's daughter Amanda, who is Ethan's former wife, and told her I would sit until the morning. That sentence carries the whole shape of our family. Divorce did not erase the roads between our houses. We had built too many porches together to pretend they did not exist. I called Ethan because a son should know when a man he once called dad is in a hospital gown listening to a machine decide his heartbeat. He answered on the first ring, voice still slick with that salesman calm. What happened, he asked. Not surprised enough for midnight. Robert felt off, I said. At the hospital now. There was a pause. Then he asked, did you open the bottle? It was not an odd question on the face of it, but the way he dropped straight to it made the air in the phone go thin. No, I said. I gave it to Robert on the porch. It was a gift. What came next was a silence so deliberate it felt like a hand pressed over the speaker. In that exact shape of quiet, something in me looked up from the floor of my life and took attendance. Looking back now, I can tell you the first breadcrumb was a throwaway line from 2 weeks earlier, standing in Ethan's garage while he sorted buckets and hoses from a landscaping job he had traded for a tile discount. He had laughed and said, "It is like chemistry, Dad. You just figure out the right dose and the whole thing pays for itself." He was talking about sealants and stain remover. Or at least, that is what I told myself at the time. People show you who they are in the smallest units, and you either write it down or you let the paper blow off the porch and pretend the wind did it. At 1:22 in the morning, I stepped outside the sliding doors to call my sister and tell her that Leah was doing God's work and to pray if she had it in her for an uneventful dawn. The hospital courtyard was empty. The sky had that hard, bright winter look that makes you think it is cleaner than it is. When I drove back home close to 3, the Ring doorbell on my front steps woke the porch light as I pulled in. The timestamp later would read 3:06 in the morning, me hands on the wheel trying to slip the night back where it belonged. I walked the short path of river rock that I laid the summer I retired, and the stones remembered the weight of my boots. The motion light at the back door clicked on and off as if shrugging. I told myself I would check the camera in the morning. I told myself I would sleep. Morning came with that split second where your body is content and your mind has not yet informed it of the news. Leah texted again at 6:32. He slept. Vitals steady. Doctor will round at 7. I thanked her and promised to bring coffee the color of courage. Before I left, I looked around my kitchen as if it were a crime scene, and I had misplaced not evidence but certainty. The counter was bare of that bottle as it should be. The sink was dry. The back door was locked. There was a thin line of cold near the threshold, as if the night had sat there and listened for a while. Ethan called at 7:10. "So what is the doc saying?" he asked, too bright. I repeated what Leah had shared. He circled back again, casual and insistent, to the gift. "You gave it to Robert." "On my porch, that same night." Another silence, then a pivot so sharp it squeaked. "Well, I hope he appreciates it," he said with that needle of contempt he likes to hide inside jokes. "People will tell you contempt is a spice that only burns when you eat too much. They are wrong. A grain is enough. I said I'm heading to the hospital. I will keep you posted." He said, "Sure." Keep me in the loop, and hung up as if the loop were something he could step into or out of without consequence. On the drive back to Silver Cross, I passed the turn for Joliet and thought of Gary, my friend from the fishing club, who runs the veterinary diagnostics lab near the river. I did not know yet that I would need him. I only knew that a man's peace is not a thing he can assume will renew itself each morning like a magazine subscription. He has to go get it. He has to name what he sees. At 9:35, the attending physician explained that Robert's pacemaker had done its job and that the lab work did not show the usual culprits. "We are keeping him for observation," he said. "Sometimes the body tells us later what it meant earlier." I said thank you and sat with that sentence like it was a hymn. Later would speak. It always does. "Here is what I fix for you now, so the road stays straight." Robert's episode began just before midnight on Thanksgiving. He arrived at Silver Cross around midnight. Leah, my niece, was on duty. I gave the bottle to Robert on my porch that same evening. Ethan learned this by 7:10 in the morning and did not like the answer, and every mile between these facts has its own echo. The next breadcrumb was waiting not in a hospital, but in a trash can in a kitchen, and I will show it to you in the light very soon. For now, remember, the quiet after a question is sometimes louder than any confession. By late morning on Friday, November 29th, 2019, Robert was resting, and Leah had sent me a photo of his breakfast tray with a thumbs up and a plastic cup. I promised coffee the color of courage, and drove home to shower, change, and feed the dog some oil. The house met me with that thin chill of the door that has been opened and closed by a stranger to me. Nothing looked wrong, and that is its own kind. I set my keys in the door, rinsed my neck, and tied up the kitchen trash the way I always do tight square order. When I lifted the bag, a glass shake thumped against the vinyl with a hollow knock. I eased the bag open and found a mason jar that did not belong to me. I do not keep canning jars. I do not can. The lid was cross-hatched with scratches, and inside clung a ring of brownish residue, as if something clear had kissed something green and then changed its mind. When I cracked the lid a fraction, a breath of sharp alcohol and bitter plant rose like a memory you would rather not own. I slid on a pair of old work gloves from under the sink, habits you learn, wiring houses never leave you, and set the jar on the counter. The bottom showed tiny flecks the color of dried tea leaves. A short length of clear plastic tubing lay near the top of the trash bag, the kind a man uses to siphon fluids or decant solutions from one container to another when he wants a steady hand to look steadier. My first thought was that I was inventing connections because midnight had made me dramatic. My second thought was quieter people who tell themselves a thing is nothing have already decided they do not want it to be something. I took out my old carpenter's pencil, wrote the date and time on a strip of painter's tape, and stuck it to the lid. Nov 29th, 11:42 a.m. Then I signed my initials because chain of custody starts with a man deciding the truth will not slip from his fingers. Before leaving, I snapped a photo of the labeled lid on my counter date time initials so the sequence would live somewhere other than memory. In the garage, a stack of moving boxes held clean zip bags and a roll of masking tape from my last attempt at organizing the fishing gear. I bagged the jar, sealed it, and wrote the same date and time again. I bagged the little length of tubing separately. When I came back inside, the back door sat in its frame like a good soldier, locked, latched, impassive. Still, a draft threaded along the threshold as if the night had left a note there that I had not learned how to read. I thought of the ring's chime at 3:06 that morning, and of the motion light shrugging at me. My camera watches the front steps. It does not see the back. A man hates the idea that his blind spots are marked by anyone but himself. On my way to Silver Cross with coffee for Leah and a paperback for Robert, I swung past Gary's place in Joliet. He runs the veterinary diagnostics lab by the river, and he is the kind of friend who can talk you through a knot without pulling it tighter. The lab smelled like bleach and sawdust, a scent that does the work of saying we try. I set the bag jar and tubing on the counter and spoke with the calm I had rehearsed in the car. "I do not need a miracle, Gary," I said. "Just tell me if what is in there is trouble." He looked at the tape at my initials and the time and nodded like a man who likes to see another man do a thing right from the start. "I will log it," he said, already reaching for a form. "I will run a quick screen and call you. If this turns into a police matter, you hand everything to them and let us redo it by their book." His use of the word "if" was kindness more than doubt. I left the jar with him signed where he pointed and kept the second bag with the tubing in my jacket pocket. Quiet revenge begins looking a lot like discipline. Driving east, I passed Ethan's exit, and a memory pulled alongside me at the speed of a single sentence. Late summer, before the leaves thought about color, Ethan had stood at my grill complaining about his homeowner association fines for leaving his trash bin out on a non-collection day. He had laughed and called the rules petty, called the neighbors nosy, called the letterhead paper with an ego. He told me about a cousin on his ex-wife's side who did landscaping and knew plants the way a barber knows hair, and how you can make anything work if you get the ratio right. He meant yard treatments and solvents. Or I let him mean that so I could keep chewing my burger without asking what he meant. Looking back now, I can tell you this: the mind will protect what it wants to love long after the heart has moved to higher ground. At the hospital, Leah took the coffee, peeked into the bag, and grinned because she could smell the good stuff. She updated me: vital, steady labs, unremarkable, and went to chase the doctor for his next pass. Robert looked less gray, more like the man who rebuilds cabinets on Sundays for the thrill of a straight line. We spoke of nothing heavy. We spoke of the game, of the grandkids, of the way time is a carpenter that works both fast and slow. I didn't mention the jar, not yet. Every story has parts that need to harden before you touch them. Back home in the late afternoon, the house was quieter than it had any right to be. The sun made a bright geometry across the tile. I lifted the trash lid to toss a tea bag and saw only coffee grounds and onion skins. The short plastic tube that had lain near the top like an accusation was gone. I stood very still. The bag had not been replaced. The twist tie was not the one I use. My hands went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the room temperature. Someone had reached into my trash and plucked out a mistake. Someone had come back for a loose end. Later, I would realize the only piece of tubing I had actually seen was already sealed in a bag in my jacket pocket. That correction mattered. The retied twist and the way the bag had been handled, though, still did not belong to me. I went to the hall closet, pulled out a spool of white thread from an old sewing kit, and stretched a thin strand waist-high across the inside of the back door, anchoring it with a single bit of painter's tape on each side where no one would notice until they did. If the door opened even a little, the thread would break. It is an old trick, older than motion sensors and doorbell cameras, the kind of thing you learn from men who learned it from men who learned it the hard way. Then I checked the deadbolt twice, set the kitchen chair just so, and walked from room to room, naming the things that were mine. The house listened. Houses do. I sat on the porch until the sky turned the color of a penny rubbed thin. Somewhere 2 blocks over, a garage band murdered a classic rock song with more heart than skill. Across the street, Mrs. Callahan brought in a wreath too early for Christmas and waved. I waved back, counted my breaths to 4, and decided that ordinary would not be stolen from me a second at a time without me noticing. Before bed, I opened the Ring app and checked the front footage from the morning. Me arriving at 3:06, me leaving again for the hospital, nothing else. The back camera I do not have could not tell me a thing. Tomorrow, I told the house we will stop guessing. I did not know then what message would be waiting to make that vow necessary. I only knew a man had to choose his posture before the knock came. Gary called just after lunch on Friday, November 29th, 2019. His voice had the tight caution of a man who respects both truth and procedure. "Frank, I ran a rapid screen," he said. "It flags a compound consistent with white snake root trematol. This is not a certificate. This is a red light. Do not touch that jar again without law enforcement." He repeated the words "consistent with," so I would hear the legal fence he was building around us. I I told him I had taped my initials, and the time on the lid sealed it and left it in his custody. Good, he said. I'm pausing here until a detective signs a chain of custody form. We will retest under their case number. I hung up and stood by my kitchen window long enough to watch the light move an inch along the countertop. Then I called Will County and asked for Detective Reyes, the major crimes liaison, who had helped a friend of mine after a break-in the previous spring. He called back in 10 minutes, voice low and even, like a man walking you down a flight of stairs. I gave him the timeline in sentences short enough to keep their balanced Thanksgiving night gift. I gave the bottle to Robert on my porch. Robert's episode just before midnight. Silver Cross admission, Leah on duty, the mason jar and the short length of tubing, my tape, my initials, Gary's preliminary flag, and the fact that my ring sees only the front steps. He did not interrupt. At the end he said, I am on my way to you. Do not touch anything else. While I waited, I did the only thing a man should do when he wants to keep from polishing his fear until it shines. I gathered paper. Receipts live where I put them, an old coffee tin on the fridge. Phone logs live where they like on the cloud, and I knew enough to let a warrant ask them to come down. I wrote myself a small correction on a torn envelope so I would not let panic do my remembering for me tubing and jacket pocket. It matters that I tell you this. The day before, when I saw the trash bag retied with a different twist and felt that unnatural draft at the back door, I thought the missing tube proved someone had gone fishing in my garbage. It took a steadier breath to admit that I had already bagged the only piece I had seen and slipped it into my pocket before driving to Joliet. That does not erase the change in the tie or the way the bag had been handled by hands not mine. It only means I will not build a house on a beam that is not there. Reyes arrived in a plain car that looked like any commuter's. He took notes standing up at my table, date and time. First, then the names I had already said, Robert, Amanda, Leah, Gary. He checked the back door and saw the hair-fine thread I had strung. You mind if I break this? He asked. It tells me what you already know. He slipped a gloved finger under the strand. It snapped with a sound small as a sigh. He crouched to examine the threshold, found the faint smear of shoe rubber where a sole had tugged at the weather stripping. We will dust, he said, but you should not rely on prints. People who do this kind of thing do not sign their work. He photographed the kitchen, the trash can, the threshold, the thread anchors on the frame, and the cleared spot on the counter where the jar had rested before I bagged it for Gary. He logged the short plastic tube I produced from my jacket pocket into an evidence bag and had me initial the seal. We drove to Joliet together. In the lab, Gary had the jar waiting in a cooler already labeled with my tape and his intake number. Reyes opened a fresh set of bags, filled out his own property sheet, and had Gary reissue the sample into police custody. Then Gary explained in the simple language, good scientists work hard to master what his quick test could and could not say. It is a plant toxin screen, he said. It cannot convict anybody, but it tells us where to look. Under your case number, I will confirm with a method that holds up in court. Reyes nodded, had him note the instruments and the chain of custody handoff on both forms, and set the cooler inside a locked bin with a case label. I can still see if I close my eyes. On the drive back, Reyes asked for the store. A limited edition bottle like that likes to be seen, he said. Boutique, not big box. I told him the place in Naperville with the glass cabinet and the copywriting that makes men feel rarer than they are. He said he would begin with the 3-tier distribution system, the law that keeps producers, distributors, and retailers in their lanes, and trace the bottle's path by invoice and lot code. It is slow if you do not know who to ask, he said. It is quick if you do. He asked me again for the record about the moment the bottle left my house. I told him as if I were measuring a cut Thanksgiving night on my porch after pie. Good, he said. Intent hates clean lines. We will give the jury a ruler. Back at my kitchen, he set his notebook down and spoke the words that separate rumor from work. I am seeking 2 warrants, he said. One for devices, phones, tablets, laptops we can lawfully seize. One for cloud accounts, backups, notes, location history. They are not the same document, and judges do not like when we pretend they are. He looked up to make sure I understood. I did. He asked if I would consent to pull the front door ring footage for the relevant hours. I did, and we watched the clip of me returning at 3:06, shoulders rounded against the wind and the stillness that followed until dawn. No one comes to the front, he said. That does not mean no one came. He stood, shook my hand, and told me to call him if anything changed, even if it felt small. Small is the only size truth comes in at first, he said. We let it grow on paper. When he left, I brewed a second pot of coffee because the first had held only the morning. The house had that after-visitor quiet that makes you hear your own breathing. I wrote myself a list on a yellow pad: hospital at 6, porch light bulb, new back camera, call Amanda to update her without spooking her. I added one line I didn't say out loud: stop pretending fear is the same as caution. In the late afternoon, the sun threw a long rectangle across my table that looked almost like a placemat for something I had not ordered. I tidied the counter, straightened the chair I had angled toward the back door, and set my keys in the bowl with the practiced clink that tells a house the day has come home. I didn't know a message was already on its way to sit where that sunlight sat, a message written in glass and the kind of ink that erases choice. I will tell you about it in a moment because it will change the shape of the air you are breathing with me right now. The message arrived the way trouble likes to travel: quiet, certain, and a step ahead of your lamp. After Detective Reyes left that afternoon, I reset my house the way a man resets his jaw. I restrung a fresh thread across the inside of the back door at hip height, taped it down with 2 neat flags of painter's tape, and said out loud what I meant to do: go to the hospital at 6. Bring coffee for Leah, sit with Robert until visiting ended, then come home and sleep like an honest man. I did exactly that. Robert looked better color in his face, a joke about the Bears that did not require them to win first. Leah yawned, smiled, and stole another sip of my contraband roast. When I left a little after 9, the parking lot glowed with winter light and the kind of cold that makes you talk to your hands. Back in Plainfield, I checked the front steps on the Ring app, empty, just the porch light, throwing its familiar triangle on the concrete. Inside, the kitchen held the shape of my day yellow pad with my list keys in the bowl. Chair angled a hair toward the back door as if it might be called to testify. I walked the rooms once, not because I was nervous, but because routine is a leash I choose to hold. Before bed, I looked at the white thread on the back door and thought of a violin string that only plays one note. I turned in at 10:30 with the kind of tired that should buy a man 6 straight hours. Sometime after 2, I woke the way you wake when a house you know decides to breathe wrong. No sound, then a soft click from the yard, the motion light doing what a good sentinel does, announcing presence without deciding meaning. My heart did its old fast drum for 3 bars and then settled into a march. I slipped my feet to the floor, stayed still, and listened. The river rock path outside remembered weight in a hush rather than a crunch, as if whoever crossed it understood that stones tell stories. I didn't touch my phone. I didn't rush. I let a slow minute pass the way a man lets a horse smell his hand before he moves. In the kitchen, the air felt cooler by a degree the way a classroom changes when a door down the hall opens. I stood where the light from the stove clock does the least damage to your night vision and looked at the back door. The white thread was no longer a line. It hung on the left tape like a question mark. I didn't breathe through my mouth or my nose for a second, as if oxygen itself might smudge a print. I angled my body so my shadow fell away from the door, and with 2 fingers I lifted the broken end just enough to confirm the cut was clean, not frayed. Someone had opened the door wide enough to step through, closed it, and left me the grammar of intent. I turned to the table to write the time on my yellow pad and saw what I had not left there. Sitting dead center on the wood, catching a slice of moonlight like a stage, was my old glass decanter. Empty, dry, polished in a way that did not look like my hands had done it. I recognized it from a box I'd stored in the basement since the day I quit. Someone had fetched it, cleaned it, and posed it. Beside it, a square of paper no bigger than a coaster. The handwriting was blocky young, forced to look careless. Next time. That was the whole sentence. No signature, no flourish. Just the kind of promise some men mistake for power. I did not roar. I did not touch a thing. I walked backward 3 steps. Pulled my phone from my pocket and took 3 photos from 3 distances each, with a corner of the room in frame so there would be no argument later about where they were taken. Then I called Reyes. He answered on the second ring like a man who keeps his boots near his bed. 2:14 in the morning, I said. Back door thread broken. Decanter on my table, empty. Note says next time. I have not touched either. He told me to stay where I was to keep the heating system running as normal, to avoid drafts I could avoid, and that he was on his way. I set the phone down and stayed planted, not because I was afraid, but because quiet is a weapon if you agree to hold it. While I waited, my phone buzzed with a text from a name I did not expect at that hour. Ethan. No preamble. Do not make a big deal out of whatever you think you found. You have always been dramatic. The timing landed like a shoe on a soft trail. I didn't answer. I watched the lock on my back door like it was a second hand. In less than 20 minutes, Reyes was in my kitchen with 2 uniforms and a crime kit that looked like a dull blue toolbox. He glanced at the thread, nodded once, then moved like a man tying his shoes, automatic, practiced, careful. He photographed the decanter where it sat, the note, the tape ends on the door, the faint smear at the threshold he had seen earlier. He powdered for prints he did not expect to find, and was not surprised when he found only the suggestion of a glove. He had me initial the evidence seals after he slid the note and the decanter, each in its own bag, into a hard-sided carrier. Same message as before, he said, eyes on the paper. Escalation without contact. It is intimidation, criminal trespass at minimum, maybe more depending on other findings. He didn't ask me who I thought had come. He didn't need me to say a name that would be hearsay until facts gave it bones. He asked if I had any decanter like this in the house normally. I told him I hadn't kept one on display since the day I put the cork down for good. He wrote that down exactly. Words matter. When the team finished, Reyes stood by the door and let the quiet settle just long enough to make room for his instruction. This solidifies the pattern, he said. It ties the intimidation to your timeline and to the toxicology track we are already on. I will file the addendum for the warrants before sunrise. When the judge wakes, I want a signature. He paused. If you receive any communication, do not answer. Forward it directly to me. I nodded. He glanced one more time at the thread, now 2 small flags of white against the door, and said almost to himself, "Sky will still be blue in the morning." He was right. The sky can be loyal while people learn how. When they left, I did the plainest thing a man can do when his house has been read like a diary. I made coffee. The rich heat pushed back the draft by a fraction. I wrote the time again, 2:14 in the morning, then added one more line in a hand I could live with. I will not be hurried into noise. That was my revenge right then. Not accusation, not swagger, procedure, patience. A pair of hands that knew where to rest. And because I know you are waiting for the drop. Yes, the phone buzzed once more before dawn, a second text from the same number with the same tone that confuses contempt for control. I let it sit unread until the first light hit the sink. Then I forwarded it to Reyes without a word. Dawn on Saturday, November 30th, 2019 came in clean and unspectacular, the kind of morning that would not admit to what it had seen a few hours earlier. I poured coffee, read the single sentence I had written in the night. Will not be hurried into noise, and felt it steady my hands. Detective Reyes called just after 7. Judge on call, signed 2 warrants at 6:40, he said. One for devices, phones, tablets, laptops, one for cloud backups, notes, location history, separate scopes, separate clocks. We will not serve them today. We move first thing Monday, December 2nd, when my full team and digital forensics can roll together. Between now and then, do not engage. Let him talk to himself. His voice had the tempered feel of a crowbar leverage without swagger. I thanked him, and he added, I'm routing an addendum for last night's trespass and intimidation. You did everything right. Quiet revenge. I was learning sounds like a chain of custody number read aloud twice. I called Silvercross to check on Robert. Leah answered between rounds, brisk and bright, in that way only nurses and teachers can manage on weekends. He slept, she said. Vitals steady. Doctor will reevaluate at noon. He is asking if you brought more of that outlaw coffee. I told her I would be there before lunch and thanked her for keeping our family stitched together without asking for credit. After I hung up, I dialed Amanda Ethan's former wife and Robert's daughter and gave her the plain version, hospital-stable police involved. I would handle the communication so she could focus on her dad. She was quiet for a long breath. Thank you, she said. He always said you were a steady man. We did not say Ethan's name. Sometimes the most merciful sentence is the one you do not speak. I opened a new binder, the thick kind, with rings that closed like a jaw, and started making order that would survive scrutiny. The yellow pad went in front. Behind it, I slid plastic sleeves with everything that had a date, my painter's tape photo from the jar, the text, timestamps, the ring. Still of me arriving at 3:06, the photo sequence of the decanter, and the note that said, next time. I printed the call log showing Ethan's message in the small hours, then I wrote a single line right under it, so I would not let hindsight romanticize anything not a licensed agent, flips through his own limited liability company with hard money lenders. That was the truth of his business. He is not a broker who lives by a professional code. He is a speculator who lives by momentum and leverage. Fixing that label in ink cleaned up a loose end in my own head. Later, if the fallout reached the men who financed his turns, that would be their arithmetic to do. My arithmetic was simpler: tell the story once in order and let paper carry the weight. By mid-morning, Reyes texted a short list of what he needed before Monday: full contact info for Ethan and his usual job sites, any addresses for the landscaping cousin on Amanda's side, and the boutique liquor store in Naperville with a description of the staff if I had it. I sent what I knew and did not guess at what I did not. He replied, "Good. Distributor already confirmed an allocation to that shop in late fall. I will pull invoices." The 3-tier trail, as he had promised, was giving us a spine. He added one sentence I read twice. "Do not be surprised if he reaches out to manage the narrative." The man understood hunger. I went to New Lenox with coffee for Leah and a paperback for Robert. He looked stronger, his color back where it belongs, the machine at his bedside more metronome than alarm. He squeezed my hand with a carpenter's confidence. "Do not back down if they offer him something sweet," he said quietly, eyes on the window as if the weather needed to hear it. "You bring the truth into a room and you set it on the table. The rest can eat around it or go hungry." That is the kind of line men like us say when our bodies have reminded us that we are landlord only by lease. I promised I would show up where I was asked and sit the way a beam sits straight patient bearing load without talking about it. On the way home, I called Gary to thank him for drawing the legal fence around his quick screen and for insisting we wait for the case number. He said he had logged the handoff to Reyes and scheduled confirmatory testing with instruments that speak fluent courtroom. "I will let the detective update you," he said. "For now, take care of your house." The phrase landed as both a directive and a blessing. I stopped at the hardware store and bought a second camera for the back, fresh bulbs for the motion light, and a longer deadbolt throw. The kid at the register asked if I was getting ready for Christmas. "Getting ready for Monday," I said, and left him to wonder which was heavier. Back at my kitchen table, I rehearsed Monday in my head the way you rehearse a testimony you hope never to give: the knock on the door at a construction site or at an apartment where Ethan parks his ambition, the calm request for devices, the baggies and seals, the search team flipping couch cushions and drawers, the polite insistence that cloud and hardware are not different countries. I did not fantasize about his face. I'm not 17. I do not confuse accountability with theater. My part was smaller and more exacting. Keep the story straight, keep the paper clean, keep my voice low. If he called, I would forward. If he showed up, I would call Reyes. If I felt the fury rise, I would go stand on my porch and count the boards I replaced the year I quit drinking. That is what men do who plan to survive themselves. At 2 in the afternoon, my phone blinked with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail and listened to a message that was a script men like Ethan learn early. "Hey Dad, there is a misunderstanding. You know how you get sometimes. Let's not bring outsiders into family business. Call me." The contempt wore a friendly mask, but the eyes showed through. I forwarded the audio to Reyes and typed nothing. 10 minutes later, another text from Ethan. "You made it weird." I answered in my head, not with my thumbs. The note on my table made it criminal. That is the difference between my quiet and your noise. In the fading light, I installed the back camera and stood in the yard to test the angle. The lens caught the river rock past the threshold and a slice of my kitchen table where the decanter had sat like a dare. I thought of Reyes's line the night before, "The sky will still be blue in the morning," and felt how true and how irrelevant a clear sky can be when a man you raised decides to live by shadows. I locked the back door, checked the new deadbolt's throw, and set my keys in the bowl with a small click that felt contractual. Monday had a shape now. I would not chase it or run from it. I would meet it at the hour it asked. Before bed, I called Robert one more time and told him the plan warrants signed service on Monday, forensics with them, no drama from me. He breathed out like a man who had been holding more than air. "Good," he said. "Make them say every step out loud." We said goodnight. I stood at the window and watched my own reflection watch me back. It is a strange mercy to realize that revenge done right looks nothing like what television taught you. It looks like patience paper, a thread across a door, a man choosing not to send the reply he could write in his sleep. And because every story leaves a small hook for the next page, I will tell you this much. At dawn, on Monday, the phones began to ring in houses that were not mine. Monday, December 2nd, 2019 began before the sun. Frost webbed the lawn like quiet paperwork signed by weather itself. I stood at my sink, hands around a mug, and watched the first gray unroll over the river rock. At 6:45, Detective Reyes called to confirm what we had arranged in words that never needed to get louder to become more real. "We are serving both warrants now," he said. "Separate packets, device, and cloud. You will not hear play-by-play. Expect an update late morning." I said thank you, set the phone down, and felt something settle in my bones that was not triumph and not fear. It was alignment. I drove to Silver Cross to sit with Robert while the hospital clock did its deliberate laps. Leah handed me a coffee with a grin that said she had smuggled Charity into a place that runs on policy. "He is dozing," she whispered. I told her it was Monday, and her eyebrows lifted in a way that told me she understood more than I had said. That is what families do when they have learned to translate each other quietly. I held Robert's weathered hand and watched the machine keep time, thought about the first house he had taught me to side, the way he had said, "Nail it once, nail it right," and how that line had nothing to do with nails. Just before 10, Reyes texted a single sentence, "Devices collected, no incident." A second ping followed 5 minutes later. "Secondary location cleared with consent items logged." I didn't ask for inventory by text. Experience teaches you to let evidence speak from paper, not from memory that can be cross-examined for sport. I walked into the hospital chapel and sat in the back pew while sunlight found the wood. I am not a man who bargained with God often. I simply said the word justice once quietly, like a name you do not shout across a yard. By late morning, Reyes called. "We executed at an apartment he uses near a job site," he said, naming the street in a voice that marked it for the record in his head. We seized his phone and a work laptop. Forensics will image both under warrant. In the garage linked to his storage unit, we located notes. He paused the way a man does when he chooses each word like a tool. "They are dosage notes, Frank. Ratios, dates, a trial and error sequence written in a spiral notebook, plus a photo on the laptop of leaves that look consistent with white snake root. There is also traffic in a CloudNote account under his credentials referencing bitter milk and tremitol. We will formalize the provider return under the cloud warrant." I said nothing for a heartbeat because there are moments when silence is the exact size of truth. Then I asked about the chain. "Clean," he said. "We photographed in place, bagged, sealed, logged, and moved. Lab will confirm the plant. Distributor ledger from the Naperville boutique already put that limited release on paper. The lot number ties to a shipment the week before Thanksgiving." I thanked him and said I would be available for whatever came next. He added, "He asked to call you." I advised him to speak to counsel. It took a breath for the meaning to land. My son had reached for the old rope. I did not take it. When I left the hospital, the sky had turned a forgiving blue, the kind that pretends to have been there the whole time. At home, the new back camera watched my threshold with a quiet patience that felt like company. I set my keys in the bowl, opened the binder, and wrote the morning down line by line. I copied the street name, the language Reyes used, the timestamps I had received. It was not that I thought I would forget. It was that I wanted to be the kind of man whose memory does not have to carry the entire story on its back. At 2 in the afternoon, the phone rang with a number I knew by the shape of it. I let it move to voicemail. Ethan's voice arrived in that practiced casual that sounds like money in a pocket. "Dad, you know how you get," he said, "overreacting. The bottle was nothing. Let us not bring the state into this. We can sort it out man to man." He had once called the court system the blunt instrument of people who cannot negotiate. I forwarded the message to Reyes without commentary. Then I stepped onto my porch, because air has a way of persuading a man to keep his voice lowered. The trees on our block held their leaves like men who refused to remove their hats inside. The neighborhood dog barked once and then remembered itself. Around 4, Reyes called again. He retained counsel, he said. "We will file charges today. Attempted murder with supporting counts for criminal trespass and intimidation related to the decanter incident." He waited for the inevitable question and I didn't ask it. Guilt and love do not fit into one sentence easily. Instead, I said, "Tell me where to be when it is time to be there." He gave me a date for an arraignment later in the week and asked if I could come in the next morning to formalize my statement. "Bring the binder," he said. "We will photocopy, then keep living. Let us do the noisy part." That night I turned on the porch light the way I always do and watched it lay its triangle on the steps. I thought of the first time Ethan toddled there, how he had laughed at a moth, how wonder had once outrun appetite in him by a mile. Memory can be a kindness. It can also be a liar if you let it vote on what comes next. I stood a while longer and then went inside, set the coffee for morning, and told the house we would not flinch. The next 48 hours moved in careful squares like a chessboard, where only pawns advance, and yet the endgame writes itself. Tuesday morning, December 3rd, 2019. I sat across from Detective Reyes while he recorded my statement. We worked the pages like carpenters measure twice. I read dates and times aloud, corrected one preposition, and let the paper take weight. When we finished, he closed the folder and gave me the look tradesmen give when the job is square. Now we let it breathe, he said. The lab confirms, the distributor testifies to chain, the provider responds to the cloud warrant, and the devices say what they have to say when forensics is done listening. By noon, the charge sheet posted: attempted murder, criminal trespass to a residence, intimidation. An assistant state's attorney called to walk me through the ARC probable cause, hearing discovery, motion practice, then trial, unless a plea took the air out early. I told her I understood the steps, and none of the outcomes deserved my speculation. When I left the building, my phone pinged again. Missed call, Ethan. A minute later, you wanted this. You always did. That sentence is the favorite jacket of a man who cannot be bothered to learn new seasons. I forwarded it and let it die, where it could do no harm. By mid-afternoon, the first ripples hit his business. A hard-money lender who had once phoned me to vouch for my son's grit now called to ask about the charges in terms so delicate they might as well have been spoken through a napkin. I said I could not comment beyond what was public and wished him a good day. Another partner emailed me my address was on an old shared spreadsheet Ethan had once roped me into for a one-line message: is Ethan available or not? I deleted it and spent the rest of the hour canceling my name anywhere near his work. Quiet revenge is sometimes eraser more than ink. That evening, Amanda stopped by with a Tupperware of soup and a face that carried more years than the calendar owed her. She is my ex-daughter-in-law by law and my daughter by practice. We sat at the table where the decanter had sat like a dare, and I told her the plan in words that did not ask for her opinion or her absolution, only for her knowledge. She said very little. Then she said the thing that matters: I believe you. She told me her cousin, the landscaping one, had received a message from Ethan a week earlier asking if he still knew where that patch near the retention pond was, the one with the white flowers that made the cows sick back in the day. She had told Detective Reyes the same, and he had added it to the map. We sat quietly for a while, shared the soup, and let the room learn our new geometry. Wednesday brought the first court appearance. I wore the same jacket I wear to funerals because I respect rooms where choices get buried. Ethan stood with counsel and avoided the gallery like it had teeth. He did not meet my eyes. The judge read the charges, set bail high enough to sound like a number, but not a life, and barred contact with me, with Robert, with Leah, and with anyone else on the witness list. When we filed out, 2 reporters asked me if I wanted to say something to the community. I said, "The process is the point," and got into my car. I do not give grief-borrowed microphones. Back home, the new back camera captured nothing but squirrels and the winter sun trying its best. The quiet felt honest for the first time in days. Then the second wave hit. His projects stopped moving. Cruz texted me because he was not answering. A neighbor from his complex called to ask if I had heard that people were in and out of Ethan's unit last week in the middle of the night. "I'm not surprised," I said, and left it there. Reyes checked in on voicemail. A crisp note: lab confirmation is in process. Distributor records clean. The boutique's owner remembered a man matching Ethan's description, asking about the limited release and whether the lot was hot. Hot as in popular or hot as in potent, Reyes had asked. He said potent and then laughed. The owner had answered. That kind of laugh starts as sound and ends as evidence. In the middle of all of this, Robert came home. I drove him from Silver Cross in the slow lane, and we talked about nothing, because nothing is precious after a week like that. On his porch, he turned to me and said, "Make them say every step out loud." We shook hands, and I saw the steadiness back in him, the carpenter's calm. I went home, made a simple dinner, and ate it like a man who finally understands that fuel and peace are the same commodity. And because a story likes to keep one last ember under the ash, my phone buzzed at 10 with a private number and a single message: "You win, you lose a son." I powered the phone down for the night and let the dark be what it is meant to be. Jail is a place where noise tries to become a person. On visiting day, I sat on a molded chair that creaked when I breathed and looked through glass that has listened to more lies and more surrender than most churches. Ethan was let in wearing standard issue beige, the swagger trimmed not by remorse, but by logistics. He picked up the phone and smiled like a salesman at a convention. "You going to fix this?" he said, not a question. I lifted my receiver and gave him my stillness instead of a greeting. The quiet pressed against the line until even he had to acknowledge its shape. "You are making it worse," he tried. "It was a joke, a prank. You always overreact." I said, "Say white snake root out loud." He stared. "Say trematol out loud." His mouth twitched the way a child's does when a teacher cancels recess. "You do not know what you are talking about." I repeated the words: lawyer, warrant, chain of custody, distributor, lot number, provider, return. Each one landed like a bead on a string. "Stop," he said. "You are not a cop." "No," I said. "I'm a witness." The word made him flinch. Men who live by narrative find the word witness offensive because it refuses to be edited. He leaned closer, voice dropping into that register where contempt pretends to be intimacy. "Dad, take back your statement. Say you were mistaken. Tell them you misremembered the night. You are old. They will believe confusion." He said old like a knife. I let it pass through me because knowledge once learned cannot be unlearned to please anybody. "No," I said. "I will testify to what I did, what I saw, and what I did not do. You brought a bottle, I gave it away immediately. Robert got sick the same night and someone broke into my house and wrote me a threat on my kitchen table. The rest is paper doing its job." He tried anger, then the cheap kind. "You were never a finisher," he hissed. "You do not have it in you." I set the receiver down on the ledge for a beat and looked at him without the mediation of sound. When I picked it back up, I said, "The next time you need to test a man's resolve, do not break into his kitchen. Ask him to sit in a chair and hold his own silence." He laughed in a way that did not move his eyes. "This is not the last chapter," he said, the line he thinks makes him mythic. "Maybe not," I said. "But you do not get to write it alone." The guard tapped the glass gently with 2 fingers, the signal for last minute. "Do you want to say anything to me as your father?" Ethan asked. "Not as your enemy." The word father lives in a house with many rooms. I chose the one with a chair and a window. "I am not your enemy," I said. "I am the man who will sit where they ask me to and tell the truth. The rest is yours to repair or to let fall." His face hardened into the kind of mask men wear when they realize manipulation is a finite resource. Walking out, I passed a bulletin board full of laminated rules and thought how odd it is that men like my son believe rules are a resource for other people. Outside, winter had sharpened by a degree. I breathed it in and let it cut. The phone rang as I reached my truck. Reyes. Within a few days of the warrants, the provider returned the first tranche, he said. Cloud notes include screenshots of a plant identification app with white snake root tagged, a draft list labeled dosage with dates, and a voice memo of him speaking to himself about getting the ratio right so the old man learns. "We will authenticate." I said thank you and sat there for a long minute while the heater struggled to find the edges of the cold inside the cab. That evening I called my sister to tell her I was all right. She asked what I was going to say on the stand. Only what happened I answered, and in order. She said that sounded like a good sermon. I laughed for the first time in days. I made a sandwich, ate it standing up, then took my plate to the sink and washed it with the deliberate care of a man who wants his day to end on a clean verb. In bed, I pictured the courtroom, not as a theater, but as a workshop. Tools on the wall, measurements written in pencil wood cut once because it was measured slow. Sleep came like a well-earned shift change. A few months later, trial began, the kind of machine that eats days and returns verdicts. And inside it, you either become fuel or you become part of the frame. The assistant state's attorney opened with a timeline so clean you could set a level on it. Thanksgiving night, a limited edition bottle appears in my kitchen and leaves with Robert because I had an agreement with my heart and with myself. Near midnight, Robert's episode, Silver Cross Intake, Leah on duty. Morning after the mason jar in my trash, the short length of tubing, my painter's tape with date and initials. Afternoon, Gary's preliminary toxicology screen flagging trematol consistent with white snake root. Night, the decanter on my table, the block letter note. Next time photographed in situ, bagged and logged. Monday, warrants served, devices seized, storage, search, dosage notes recovered. The boutique owner in Naperville took the stand and spoke to the distributor ledger, to the lot number, to the man who had asked whether the lot was potent. He pointed to Ethan. He did not look happy about it. Good witnesses seldom are. Gary wore his best shirt and brought clarity instead of flair. He explained the quick screen and its limits, then described the confirmatory testing requested by the police under the case number, the instruments, the controls, the results. Consistent with white snake root trematol, he said, and defined his terms without condescension. The forensic botanist followed and turned the photo of the leaves from Ethan's laptop into a small lecture about morphology, habitat, and the historical record of cow's milk sickness in our part of the country. Detective Reyes presented chain of custody like it was a prayer he had memorized, each handoff logged, each seal initialed, each timestamp a rung on a ladder the jury could climb without looking down. Digital forensics walked the jury through the provider return cloud notes created, edited, and saved under Ethan's credentials, a draft titled Dosage Listing Measurements and Intervals, a series of searches for extraction methods, a voice memo where Ethan said, "Get the ratio right and the old man learns." The defense argued that the cloud was a fickle witness, that anyone could have accessed it, that my house was a stage I had set because I was a jealous, controlling father, angry at my successful son. That was the wrong room for that story. It dissolved when measured against the timeline, the receipts, the lab, the distributor, and the threats. My turn came. I took the stand and answered the questions with sentences short enough to carry. I didn't volunteer drama. I didn't recycle pain. I told the sequence once in order and let the room decide if plain speech could still earn a hearing. On cross, the defense tried to smear quiet into motive. "You did not like your son's success," counsel suggested. "You resented his risk-taking." I replied that I had taught him how to replace a light switch, how to replace a rotted board, how to replace a bad idea with a better one. "I like honest work," I said. "Risk that confuses people with tools is not a trade." They asked why I had not confronted Ethan the night of the decanter. "Because I prefer to call the police before I argue with a trespasser," I said. The gallery exhaled a little laughter it could not help. The judge let it pass. Ethan did not take the stand. His counsel rested on a narrative that required the jury to believe that coincidences love to travel in packs. The state summarized with a straight ruler laid across the week. Gift, weaponized a target, missed a hospital bed, occupied a home, invaded a threat, written a pattern revealed in a plan documented by the defendant's own pixels and pen. The judge read instructions, the jury filed out, and time grew a new shape in the room. They came back faster than any of us had rehearsed for. Guilty on attempted murder, guilty on criminal trespass to a residence, guilty on intimidation. When the clerk read the words, a weight lifted in me that did not feel like celebration. It felt like gravity redistributing itself to where it had always belonged. Ethan stared straight ahead, then turned and found me and gave the same theatrical half-smile he had used in jail. "This is not the last chapter," he said, as if saying so could make it true. The judge set sentencing for a date 4 weeks out. We stood. We left. The sky was that particular December blue that makes a man believe daylight can carry him all the way home. Sentencing is the part of the machine that has learned not to smile. The probation report spoke of risk of planning, of a lack of remorse, evidenced not only by words but by acts, the decanter, the note, the late-night trespass. Friends of his, the ones who had done well when he did well, wrote letters about potential in youth. The prosecutor asked for a term that understood the difference between an accident and a recipe. The defense asked for mercy that had not been earned. The judge listened with the immovable patience of someone who has spent years letting chaos discover its own boundary. He pronounced 25 years with 15 to be served before parole could breathe its conditional air. I watched Ethan's shoulders drop one notch and then hold. He looked at me again, less theater in it now, and said, "This is not the last chapter. We are a family that knows how to repeat ourselves," but I did not give him the dignity of a reply. The aftershocks arrived like all aftershocks do, uneven, inconvenient, inevitable. The lenders called their notes. Projects froze in gluey stages, drywall, half-taped cabinets hung on one hinge. If he had been licensed in any trade that requires a license, that license would have been suspended. He was not, and so his circle simply contracted until there was nothing left to orbit. The landlord in his complex changed the locks on the storage unit after the search. A notice went up that non-compliance with community rules results in termination. The homeowners association that once sent him warnings about trash day now posted a polite bulletin reminding residents that their cameras were for safety, not for theater, and to call police if they saw anyone on someone else's stoop after midnight. I smiled at the diplomacy of it. Communities are their own quiet juries. Amanda stopped by with a small box of photos that did not know they had become evidence of a time before something turned. We looked at one where Ethan was 6 and holding a fish he had not actually caught. I had put my hand under his to steady it, cropped out of the frame by a cousin who was too short then to understand how pictures make stories true. "Do you hate him?" she asked, not looking at me. "No," I said. "I do not know how to hate a person I helped make, but I can hate what he chose." She nodded, set the photo face down, and said she was taking her dad to a cardiology follow-up next week. "He wants to come by after," she said. "He wants to sit on your porch and say the sentence he told you he would." I told her my porch belonged to anyone who intended to sit and say only true things. I wrote to Leah a thank you card in real ink on real paper, because some work deserves to leave a stain on your hand. I told her the way she held panic off the floor that first night had kept me standing. She sent back a text with 3 heart emojis that looked like the stickers she used to put on my fridge when she was little. I drove to Joliet to shake Gary's hand. He would have settled for a text, but I'm a man who likes to close circles in person. He showed me without letting me touch the copy of the lab report that the court had accepted into evidence. "Science is slow on purpose," he said. "Slow keeps it honest." He gave me a package of coffee beans because men like us are awkward with thanks that cannot be weighed. At night, the house went back to being a machine for quiet. The back camera caught raccoons and the odd cat. The motion light did its work without dramatics. I sat on the porch and wrote a list that was not about court for the first time in weeks. Tighten the fence latch, winterize the hose bib, call the union hall about volunteering for the apprenticeship class once a month. When your life stops being about defense, it has to become about maintenance, or it will look for trouble again out of habit. And because stories of this shape like to tempt a final lurch, I will tell you the last time he tried. A letter arrived from a return address that did not exist. Inside, a single line in blocky handwriting that tried too hard to be careless. "You will regret this." I took it to Reyes. He copied it, logged it, and shrugged a little because some men mistake threats for weather. "If he wants to add charges, he can keep writing," he said. "Or he can choose quiet." I chose quiet. I took my coffee to the porch, watched a gray morning peel itself into a better color, and let my heart do nothing heroic. Here is what peace actually looked like after the machine powered down. Winter stepped aside for spring without sending me a memo. Robert came by wearing a new ball cap in the same old steadiness. We sat on my porch, the one that has listened to more truth than most courtrooms, and he said the sentence he had promised to say. "You did the right thing. Do not let anyone make you forget it." We talked about the lake, about grandkids learning to bait hooks without screaming at worms, about the way a day can be saved by a small task done well. He left a half hour later, and the porch held his shape for a minute like good wood does when it has agreed to carry a man. I went back to the union hall and taught a class of apprentices how to wire a 3-way switch without cursing how to label a panel. Like you respect the person who will open it in 15 years, how to leave a job cleaner than you found it. They asked about my scar, and I told them that old hearts can be tricked into thinking they are new if you treat them kindly. On Saturdays, I drove to the lake. Sometimes I caught a fish, sometimes I caught a story, sometimes I caught nothing at all, and that was fine because the quiet paid cash. Amanda and I learned how to speak about Ethan without letting him occupy the whole conversation. Leah got engaged to someone who knows how to make coffee and make space. Gary finally took that vacation to a cabin where the Wi-Fi pretends to be a rumor. Detective Reyes sent a holiday card with a photo of a baby who looked surprised to be real. I put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a trout and stood there longer than a man should to look at someone else's joy. It did not make my house feel emptier, it made it feel appropriate. Sentences from the trial and from the sentencing hearing would drift back to me when the house was quiet, like tools hung on a pegboard that remind you of jobs done and jobs avoided. "Intent hates clean lines," Reyes had said while he worked my backdoor thread between his fingers. Let the jury have a ruler. The ruler had been enough. The old lie that drama is the only form of justice sank a little deeper into the mud where it belongs. The temptation to perform my grief for strangers walked to the edge of my porch and waited for an invitation that never came. When the date markers rolled around Thanksgiving, late November, the smell of buttered rolls and hickory smoke, I did not flinch. I set a second place at the table for whoever needed it that year. Sometimes it was Robert, sometimes it was a neighbor with a story that weighed exactly one dinner. Sometimes it was no one, and the empty chair served its purpose by being a chair you could see through. I kept the back camera on, not because I was afraid, but because light is a habit I would like to keep. If you are still with me, if you have listened to a father tell how a gift became a weapon and how quiet became a verb, hear this revenge that leaves you loud will follow you home and find a bed in your house. Revenge that leaves you calm will go to work for you while you sleep. I did not outsmart my son. I outweighted his noise. Paper patience procedure, a thread across a door, a decanter I refused to touch, a phone I refused to answer with anything but a forward to a detective who knew how to speak the language of the state without breaking it. Justice arrived. Peace took longer. Both were worth the price. So I will ask you the question I ask my apprentices when they hurry a cut. What are you going to have to live with when this day ends? If you have ever been blindsided by family greed, if you have ever looked at a person you love and realized you were both in a room, neither of you had built, drop your city in the comments. Tell me what quiet looks like where you live. Subscribe if you want the part I did not tell yet, the fishing story with the storm, where I learned how to measure a sky the way you measure a wall. But for this chapter, know this, the sky was still blue the morning after, and that was not an accident.